Let me officially welcome you to this EABH conversation about archives as strategic assets, together with Anders Sjöman. My name is Carmen Hofman. I'm Secretary General of EABH. So most of you today, you know EABH. We are an international independent non-for-profit organization that promotes the history of finance, policymaking, and the archives. And all members, all non-members are kindly invited to join EABH as members. It's very easy, and we have various membership offers for different budgets. Just have a look at our website, bankinghistory.org. Before we start a technicality, we have set up this talk as a meeting so we can see all of you. So please feel free to leave your videos on. And after the talk, let's ask some questions in person. So if you have a question, raise your hand with a little icon and we will coordinate a little bit. If you don't want to ask your question in person, you can always use the chat function. But now let's start and talk a little bit about archives and how to properly use them as an asset and leverage them for future growth of your company. Our speaker today is one of the most renowned experts in this field. It's Anders Sjöman, who works for the Center for Business History in Stockholm, Sweden, where he is the head of communication. Please, Anders, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes to talk about what we call heritage marketing or history marketing or effective use of history. And we use those terms at the Center for Business History in Stockholm, where I work, when we talk to companies, trying to convince them that they should put budgets and money into preserving their history, building archives, and in using that history. I'll turn on my little slide share here. Before I actually talk a little bit more about where I work so you understand who's talking to you, let me show you two approaches to using history as a strategic asset in companies. Here's one view. AFRI is a Swedish-Finnish tech consultancy. This is how they looked at their history 2 years ago. They don't even care about it. They care about the future, as if history didn't matter, as if history actually was a burden. And I've talked to them and they know I use this example, and of course not everybody uses it there. And for them, it came out of a position where they had just merged two companies. They wanted to set the new mark of the new company. But I think that's quite telling, though, that this is how they chose to phrase it. The complete opposite view is this. From a Swedish department store, NK. They've been around for 100 years. They're proud that they have 100 years. They are proud that they can find the commonalities between what they did then and what they do now, and actually position it. And somebody else who found this commonality was KLM, the airline, last year, when they turned 100. I think this image is fantastic, showing both that they are doing what they've always been doing, but also what's new in how they do it and who does it. Unfortunately, KLM turned 100 when the pandemic hit, so I've understood that all their centennial celebrations had to be put on hold. I don't know if they're going to celebrate 101 or 102 instead, but I hope they do, because they have a lot of history to work with. So this is what we at the Center for Business History in Stockholm a lot of times come up against, people who think that the future points one way and the history points another. And the important route to take is, of course, following the future. And we keep arguing with them that no, history is support for your future. Whatever you promise today is credible because you have a track record, because you have history and heritage to show that you have been able to do stuff in the past. And by stuff, I mean you don't necessarily have done exactly what you're challenged with today, but you have faced challenges in the past and you have overcome them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be as old as the company is. So that's the premise of this talk. History is your support for whatever future activities you do. History is your proof point for the promises you have today. In short though, who am I and where do I come from to talk about this? I work at the Center for Business History in Stockholm. We are soon 50 years old. This is one of our archive sections that you're looking at right now. If you turn left into one of those areas, you might find my colleague Benito, who works there. We take care of about 75,000 shelf meters of material for about 7,000 Swedish companies, dating from the 1600s up until today, primarily, of course, from the 1850s and up until today. We are an outsourced archive facility. That's the shortest way to explain what we do. We were founded in 1974. We have a mission statement that you see there. We are based in Stockholm. We have one smaller section nowadays in Uppsala, an hour north of Stockholm, where we have a large biotech cluster. So a lot of biotech industry goes in there. And these numbers I've already mentioned. What's important is that you can, well, you've understood by the way I phrase myself, we are a very commercial entity. We sell archive services, shelf space, archive consultancy, we sell editorial services. But in the end, the commercial entity that does this is actually fully owned by a nonprofit. And a nonprofit is the English term. In Swedish, it's an ideell förening, which is still can run commercial activities. So this nonprofit, whatever money we make in the commercial activities goes to the nonprofit owner. And there we can do things that perhaps a single company wouldn't pay for, but that we, since we have the 75,000 shelf meters and we have the 7,000 companies, we can find interesting research topics in that material. And we can invite researchers and academics to work with us. And we find financing for those projects. So commercially, we sell archival and editorial services. If you are, for instance, Ericsson, the telco, or Electrolux, you will have your historical material with us, and whenever you need it, you can call us and we'll look it up and find whatever it is you're looking for. And when you turn something, you have an anniversary, we can help you with researching and also narrating, telling your story. And we are about 28 people doing this. Archivists primarily, some editors and some storytellers. And I'll explain a little bit more as we go along on how we balance that work. Editorial work, just briefly to show what that might be. This is some of the editorial work we've done in the past, some of the most recent ones. You can tell there's a lot of anniversaries, centennials and bicentennials, a lot of books, a lot of publications, magazines. But we, of course, whenever we are asked to help a company tell their story, we tell it in any which way they prefer or we think is appropriate. So there are websites as well. This is a website for one of the retailers. Ericsson, the telco, has a corporate website. We've built that part of their website, the history part of that website. We do podcasts. We do exhibitions when needed. So this is just a way to show that we think there are many ways to share a corporate story, a corporate heritage. It doesn't just have to be in text and images, although that's the most frequent one. But there are many ways, and we like to think that we've done everything except pantomimes that's still left. We also do our own editorial activities. So we do things on assignment by companies, but we run in the nonprofit association, we run our own editorial activities. We publish a quarterly magazine, Företagshistoria, business history, that hits the stands once a quarter. We reuse most of those articles on a website called bizstories.com. Unfortunately, everything here is in Swedish, so I can't share that much. And we also use most of what we've written or developed editorially for schools, primarily for secondary schools, ages 15 through 18, where we cut up the material a little bit more so it will fit a 40-minute lesson, and we adapt it to the Swedish school curriculum. That's briefly about us. And just one last thing, although we primarily look backwards, if you want, to the archives and see what we have there and share the heritage and history of what has come before. Right now, we have one project where we are looking at what's happening right now, the pandemic. So we are looking at how Swedish business and how Swedish corporate life has been affected by the pandemic. And we started that already in March last year as the first signs started developing. So we are continuously developing source material through interviews, through surveys, through media coverage, and with our various companies that have their archives with us. We make sure that whatever they have in turn developed related to the corona situation, that they also add that to their archives. The idea is that whenever this pandemic, hopefully soon, is over, we can all start traveling and meeting again. We can invite researchers into this material to see what happened. Which companies survived, which didn't, which ones were on the brink but made a comeback, which companies, and there are a few, were not affected at all, and etc. And by doing this continuously, we also think that this is a way to capture the impressions of people when they happen. In hindsight, we will have a lot of explanations ready-made for what happened, but as it goes along, we'd like to capture how people are developing their views on the situation. That's briefly about us. I've been working here for 6 years. I have a background in PR and in developing case studies for Harvard Business School, so I love storytelling based on actual facts, on real data, on real confirmed source material. So if this is our mission, to preserve and present Swedish business history, our strategy to do that in the commercial part of what we do is to provide services, archive and editorial services. In a way, we are consultants providing all this. So it gives us a fair overview of Swedish corporations, because we work only with Swedish corporations. But it gives us a good overview over industries and sizes and geographies, and a experience in how to persuade companies into actually putting value on their history. So we have to make corporations value their history for them to want to buy archive services, for them to want to invest in an archive, and not just value in a general sense. They have to put a monetary value on their history. There are budgets that need to be made. And we are the first to understand that a company that is working with a new launch of a product or just merged with another company, they are all worried about what's happening now and in the future. So putting money and aside in the budget for the archive, or for stepping up the archive, or for investing in the archive is not the first priority. So what I'm going to share with you now are all the reasons that we give them why they still should invest in a company, archive, in a corporate history. And you'll notice that I use heritage and history interchangeably, as if they are the same. In this context, let them be. And one way to look at history and heritage and the value of it is through this napkin from a pizza chain in the UK. Because this at least is a sign that a company values a little bit of their heritage, the fact that they put their foundation here. So pizza in style since 1965. Apparently, there seems to be some value for this company that they've been serving pizzas for a while. So this is for us at least a sign, even if they don't put a lot of money into their history or heritage, they do value it to some degree. And if you start traveling the world, you start seeing these everywhere. This is a deli chain in Delhi, serving spring rolls since 1972. Back in London, Hamleys have been selling toys since 1760. I don't want to buy toys from 1760, but the fact that they've been selling it since that long, okay, probably a good toy store to go to. They should know what they're talking about. Here's a restaurant in Washington, D.C., fairly close to the White House. Old Ebbitt Grill, they've been serving food since 1856, but when I looked at their history, they actually had only been in this locations for the past 30 years, and ownership had changed a number of times. So the question is, it's not the same restaurant as it was in 1856, but they still track their lineage, and they're proud of that lineage. Clear Channel, the outdoor advertising firm, I saw this in Stockholm a couple of days ago, claim that they've been pioneers outdoors since 1879. They had electronic displays. No, but what they claim, and the Clear Channel itself was not founded until 1970s in Texas. But they bought a printing house in Stockholm a couple of years ago, which was founded in 1879, which had been putting up posters, physical posters in Stockholm since 1879. So they want to claim a big enough lineage, as long enough lineage as they can. Again, they must be valuing the history if they go to that length. And it's not just B2C companies, B2B as well. Here's a lorry transport between Stockholm and one of the ports that take ferries over to Finland. They've been doing lorry transport since 1948. I wasn't driving when I took this picture, I should say. But for them, it's a value. They've been doing this for a long time. Even if you haven't been doing it for that long, it seems important enough. Socks, a sock company from Sweden. And the last one of examples here I just take, because this one I took actually 2 years ago in 2019. Here was a company that wanted to celebrate their foundation year, the year they were founded. So having a relationship with your year, your foundation year, the fact that you've been doing it for short or long, tells us that a company does value their age, their history, their heritage, their experience. As you can understand, I've become quite a nerd in this, so here are more examples. And if you want to see even more, please join our little Facebook group where we all share this. Some of you here, I think, are members already. But this is just a fun way to at least show that companies, if they do nothing else with their history, they at least value the foundation year. And that tells us, when we talk to them about heritage, is a useful asset. It's something in a company's portfolio of things they can play with that is useful. But the question then becomes, is it a strategic asset, one of those key assets that you really should be using? And here's the core of my presentation, because I'll argue, of course, that it is. And I use an old framework for this. Jay Barney in 1991 came up with 4 criteria for what makes a corporate asset a strategic asset. And typically, strategic assets are those that a company really exploit to achieve advantages over their competitors that their competitors can't mimic. This is something that is unique to us. A strategic asset, you have lots of assets in a company, but the ones that really set you apart are the ones that are strategic. And a strategic asset from him should be marked by 4 qualities. It should be rare, meaning unique to this organization. No other organization should have it. It should be imperfectly Imitable, hard phrase, basically means it can't be copied by a competitor. If you have it, it's unique to your organization, another company should not be able to copy it and thus have it. Thirdly, if you lose it, there's no other asset you have that can replace it. And fourthly, it should be valuable. The last one is a very nebulous idea, so I'll go into some length on why history and heritage is valuable. Just an example before I start arguing how history meets all those four criteria. A typical example of a corporate strategic asset is, of course, the secret recipe for Coca-Cola. Pepsi doesn't have it. Nobody else has it. It's rare to Coca-Cola. It can't be copied by a competitor. If they lose it, it's gone. Nothing else they have can replace it, even if they have Fanta and Sprite and what else they have. And it's, of course, very valuable. So the question now becomes, is a heritage a strategic asset? And I'll say it is. And I'll go through the four different criteria here to see, to argue why. Of course, it is unique and rare to the organization. No two organizations can have the same history, the same experience, the same heritage. And just to bring home that point, let's take the two sibling companies, the German shoemakers from the same German town, created by the same German family, the two brothers. Although they share all that, they still have distinctly different histories. One brother broke up with the other to form Puma. The first brother went along and kept building Adidas. So even if you share a lot, you do not share everything, and your history to your company is unique to you. And if you look, whenever I meet startup companies, it's fascinating how many of them who have been around for 6 months seem to die for a longer history that would prove how unique they are. And the typical phrase is, between the four founders of this startup, we have together 20 years of experience in the business, whatever business it is. So you try to build that uniqueness even if you don't have that history. So it's rare, definitely. Can it be copied by somebody else? The short answer is, of course, no. Nobody can copy. If it's unique to you and you have lived through it, nobody can claim it afterwards. People can try to mimic it. People can try to claim that it's your history is their history, and we've seen examples of that, of people piggybacking on other companies' histories, and normally that never works. As a picture just to show here, here's a Swedish example of the leading Swedish ice cream brand for almost 100 years now. Everybody can make ice cream, but nobody can copy the history and the experience and the brand knowledge that EABH has built over time. And it's so hard to copy that instead of copying it, other ice cream brands buy existing brands. And in this case, Unilever bought EABH a number of years ago, kept the brand, kept the company, has not changed it into all the other, any of the other brands that Unilever has across Europe. So of course, you can't copy it. If you lose it, can you replace it with something else? If for some reason my heritage went away, could I use another asset in my corporate portfolio instead? And the short answer is no. And the sad image to go with that is the fire in the Universal Music Group's archive in 2008, where they lost a lot of original recordings of famous artists, a lot of the original production tapes. And they have been looking very hard to find if by chance there were copies or earlier versions of it stored by somehow randomly in other places. So they're trying to piece together their history. They can't replace it with anything else. So that part of their history, if you lose it, you lose it. This is the equivalent to Alzheimer's for a company. Lose your history, you lose your memory, you lose your history, which make that such a terrible disease. Lastly, and this is the hardest one because to try to argue for, because it's such a nebulous idea, history is valuable. Yes, everybody of course will say history is valuable, but is it valuable enough to put money into and budget into it? So we use a number of different aspects of what makes it valuable. One, of course, is that history builds brand. A young company, a young brand without history has no brand recognition. Whereas if I show you 3 Swedish logos now, I'm betting that all of you had some instant reaction to these logos, good or bad. But when you saw the Volvo logo, you thought of a car that has certain values. You saw Ericsson, you thought of phone systems that has a certain value, or Spotify, thought of a music service that has certain values to you. These values were not created spontaneously, they were created over time. And when you talk to brand experts, they were created in a context where, in conversation between the company and its customers. But history builds brand. History fills your brand with meaning. So that's one way to look at the value. The other thing, in a world where everybody more and more craves authenticity, that things are real, history is the most real you can get. And this is one of the arguments also we use whenever a company, it doesn't happen often, but it may happen, that a company says, yeah, but that part of our history, let's skip that. Or this part of our history, we're not really sure what happened there. Can we just say that this happened? Just to make the bridge, between the two parts that are already. And we say no. Don't make it up. Don't sugarcoat it. Let the fact that it is authentic carry your brand. And the example I've chosen for here as an image is from a hotel in a small town in mid-Sweden, where when I checked in and signed a very physical guest book, which was nice already, they had the guest book for that date from 60 years ago open. So I could see who lived there 60 years ago today, who checked in. It doesn't become more authentic than that. History and heritage, of course, provides knowledge, and there are so many quotes and phrases and that you can use. And I've chosen this one. We're smarter because we know where we come from. We make more informed decisions if we know our good and bad decisions from before. So I'll leave it at that. It creates value in a very tangible, physical way. And this is, of course, where most of the companies we talk to say, okay, if I'm going to put this much money into my archive and heritage management, how much will I get out of it? What's my return on investment? We don't have the formula for that, but we have ways to reason about it. And one way to reason is to look at surveys on how much of a brand value is attributed to company reputation. And here's one from a couple of years ago, where Weber Shandwick, a PR firm, a global PR firm, asked companies around the world, asked the CEOs, how much of your stock value would you say comes from your company's reputation? Not what you're selling today, not how you're selling it or your services or what people think of your advertising. How much of your value comes from your reputation? And here I use reputation as a substitute for heritage. You wouldn't have a reputation if you didn't have a history. And they say 60%. I haven't seen them redo this survey, and I hope they do. But for now, that's a very good number to have. Another way to look at how history actually puts a monetary value. I'm taking from our friends at the History Factory, which is a company in the US, if you haven't heard of them, that does similar work to what we at the Center for Business History does. They have archive services, they have editorial services. And this is an example that they've given that I've clearly nicked with their permission from them. Assume that you're a company buying another company. The company that you're acquiring trades right now at $40 per share, but you're willing to pay $80 per share when you buy this full company. What is why do you want to pay that extra? Well, you're paying a premium for something, a goodwill premium. Brand value is a part of that premium. And of course, as we just said, brand value comes from your history and your heritage. There has to be heritage value in this. So one reason that you're willing to pay more for a company than it publicly trades for is that you're willing to pay for its history. You're paying for the heritage. So those are 4 of the 5 reasons why it's valuable. And the last one is that we give to companies is that it gives a context to what your company is doing. One of our catchphrases when we talk to them, when we get down to writing history is don't write about what you've done, write about how you have made societies better. Write about what you contributed, not how you did it. And one way is to put your company's story in the larger context, make it interesting for people. And the example I use for that are 3 middle-aged Swedish men. Per Albin Hansson was the prime minister in very formative years in the 30s and 40s. And people like to say that he built the country. In very many ways, the Sweden we know today would not have been in existence if it hadn't been for the plans and policies that he and his government put in place during those years. So Per Albin built the country. We like to say that Ingvar furnished it and that Erling dressed it. And of course, Ingvar is the founder of IKEA, and Erling is the founder of H&M. And that's just a phrase that's become popular. And you see it every now and then in business press and in editorial pages here and there. But talk about putting your company in the larger history of a whole nation. Find why your history is important to the society that you work in. And that is an argument we use when we talk to communicators or marketers at companies. And on a side note, there's a lot of talk, and has been for a couple of years now, about finding the company's why. There are books written about this. Find the value of your company. Why is the world a better place? Because this company exists. Find your company's why. And we keep saying that your history proves your why. So those were the reasons, the strategic reasons. Fairly high level. When we get to a meeting with a company where we get to sit down for this long, as I just done with you, it's rare. So we have shortened versions of it. There are companies that automatically understand this. So we don't have to go through this whole reasoning, this line of reasoning with them. And when we get to work, we all are in alignment that history supports your future. This is what we call history marketing. Sometimes also called heritage marketing. Sometimes also called effective use of history for a company. And we define it as when an organization actively, it's not just something that happens, they've actively chosen, they use their own authentic, it's not made up, make-believe, their own authentic heritage or its historical context for business purposes. And the last part I put there just to bring home the point that we are fully aware that there is a whole body of work done in academia about uses of history for organizations and corporations. we draw a lot of learning and knowledge from that. What we are talking about here is very practical, operational arguments for a company. So it's more putting businesses making effective use of history for a business purpose. Of course, when you sell history, as we in effect do, you will come up against those that say, okay, but this is not trustworthy because the company itself said it. This is not reliable because there's a hidden agenda behind telling the story this way. So we always have to be mindful of customers, companies who want to sugarcoat or cherry pick in their history. We always have to be mindful of how we present it. There are ways around that to make sure that people understand that this is the full picture. You present the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, and you give context to reasons. And there is a lot of learning we've taken from work done in Germany, of course, how you handle the Second World War period and how white papers are written, how they go through making sure that their history is fully documented, often by external sources or third parties. And there are other countries across the world that have similar situations. If you're a German company, of course, you have to think about the Second World War. If you're an American company with an age, or if you're an American university, you have to think about where were you in the War of Independence, the Civil War. And there are universities which made all their fortune on slave money. How do you deal with that history? So there are, of course, in an effective use of history, you have to think about balancing all the things that are expected that you share, and how you balance it, the good and the bad. Once you do that, you find that balance. We find that an effective use of corporate history marketing, will help with three things: build the brand, it will strengthen the organization, and will handle risk and change. Build the brand. Hennes is the first store that will eventually become H&M. Here's the origin of H&M. The very first store in Västerås, a smaller town, mid-sized town in Sweden. Strengthen the organization. Clas Ohlson is a retailer that has gone from mail order to physical and now has to go into the whole e-retail and close stores. They find that the shifts in how people buy, the historical shifts in how people buy products, help explain the changes they have to do now, which then also helps with the third part there, help handle risk and change. If you have to change, and you're standing in, and you have to get your organization to change, you can probably find examples in your own past of how you have changed, and use those historical examples as a propeller, as a help, as a leverage for the change that you're facing right now. So that's the bulk of my presentation. I thought I'd finish off with just a few very practical things. This is how we work with companies. If we do get one of the companies to say, okay, that's great, let's show our history, the good and the bad, the full, we understand everything that you're saying, let's do it. How do we work together? We have 6 steps to effective history marketing, we say then. 3 steps which talk about the perspective, and 3 steps that are the actual work. And the first 3 steps, we normally work together with a company, often together with their communication department, if they have a value, documentation of their mission, vision, their corporate values. All those guideline documents help also when you think about how you tell your history. But we say that, why do you have to tell your history? Well, it's your proof point for today's promises. That's why we're doing it. So whatever you're dealing with today, we need to find the things in your past that reflect, that broaden the picture, that help understand how we got here. That's why we do it at all. Secondly, just to make sure that we make it relevant for today, we actually say, start with the future and work backwards. What are your challenges today? Let's find similar challenges in the past. Let's find similar things in the past that mirror, reflect, broaden the picture again. This is a phrase that we have very much in common with the History Factory in Washington, D.C. They've actually written a full book on it. So if you want to read a fun book on this, it's called Start with the Future and Work Backwards. They phrased it so perfectly, we use their phrase. And thirdly, I've already said, focus on what you've added to society, not how you did it. I think we've all seen enough timelines of we were founded then, and then we bought this company, and then our CEO was this, and then we spun off this, and then we acquired this, and then we launched this product. Very inside out type of timeline. The interesting timeline, on the other hand, is the world needed this. The world looked like this. That's why we launched this. The world changed like this. That's why we had to find new partners in order to fulfill our need, our vision. So focus on the broader. So if you have all that in place, then we just say, okay, let's get to work. We'd like to do a historical overview. Just get all the facts on the table. We call it a history sheet. It's a glorified Excel sheet, spreadsheet. We put everything that's happened in the company on a timeline, big and small. But we, hopefully, if we've discussed the first 3 points properly, we have a couple of themes, a couple of guidelines on what we should be focusing, looking extra for. And we can match the various things that happen every year against those themes. So it becomes a history sheet that is actually, you can work with. Then we, out of all those things that happen, we find the most poignant stories. Virginia Woolf, the writer, she talked about the fertile fact in a biography. Any biographer can put a timeline together of what happened. But the interesting biographer finds the one fertile fact that helps build the full story. The one thing that represents so much more. So, and in a person's life and in an organization's life, there will be plenty of fertile facts of interesting moments, pivotal moments. We try to find those that say something more about the company. And in practice, that ends up being 10, 15 stories. And then once you have 10, 15 stories, you can choose however you want to package them. Web, books, magazines, movies, it's all those things that I showed before. And at all steps, don't forget, verify, fact check, don't cherry pick. I keep coming back to this. So that's practical work for us. And one last thing I'll throw in also, by the way, if you have an anniversary, use it. Anniversaries are our best friend. Because that's when companies and organizations, they want to celebrate. So let's use this urge to celebrate and the money that normally comes with it to dive into our history, to make that anniversary about something more than just turning an age. And if you're on LinkedIn, I'll send out all these images later and you'll have the link in there. Martin von Aronet is the head of communication for Electrolux Group globally. He's written a great 10 tips on how to make the most out of a corporate anniversary on LinkedIn. He spoke at an annual event that we have that we call a History Marketing Summit, where we invite companies to share how they worked with their history. And if you want to, there are films to watch. We film everything that happened there. So for the past 4 years, when we've run this, we've filmed every presentation and it's on our website. I'll send out that link too later and you'll see it. Not just Swedish, but a number of companies from various parts of the world talk about how they're used their history. And Melanie and Yuko have been there and talked. So we believe in the power of the example, of how other people have used it. And hopefully, wherever you work, you can find a company that is in the same industry or in the same age or same geography, and you can hopefully learn from something from that. That was my full presentation. Happy to take any questions, comments, discuss anything that has come up. While you start formulating that first question, this is an image that we use internally. This is our history marketing machine. that takes the archive material and turns it into good narrative editorial content. And then, of course, we have the response sometimes, oh my God, are you destroying the archive? And we're like, no, of course not. We're refining it. And if you think about this as agriculture, whatever you harvest will grow back next year. History keeps filling itself. Melanie, a question.
Thank you very much, Anders. That was fantastic. And I'm sure everybody else here is as convinced as you are about the value of archives and that they are an asset. And it's really more of an observation than a question. And that is, listening to you, I can't think of a single company that would deny the value of a brand, the word brand. And there's that kind of often a negative application to the word archive, but it is, in essence, it is the same, isn't it? They are each the same thing, and it's just the term. So I wondered if you'd had pushback, in a sense, when you've used the word archive, if the same people in the room have thought, oh yes, it's the brand, we do need to do this.
Absolutely right. I mean, I need to make the bridge between archive and brand value quickly whenever I talk to people. And if I don't have half an hour or more, like we did here, much more than half an hour, by the way, sorry. If I only have 20 seconds, I only talk about the brand value. History, your brand is built by your history. You have to own it. Otherwise, other people will tell it for you.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great.
There seems to be a chat question. Repeat what I said at the very beginning about history and the future and credibility. Oh, I have to remember what I said there. I think I said something about, one of our catchphrases is that history is your best proof point for what you're promising today. Your promises today are credible because you have a heritage and a history and experience to lean on. And then, of course, the follow-up becomes show what you did in the past, so people believe that you will accomplish whatever it is you're promising today. Russell?
Hi, I don't actually work in a company as such, and not in the private sector. We work in the public sector. Yep. But I can see that what happens in the private sector trickles down into the public sector. And we often find ourselves in a situation where, despite the fact that our archives are necessary, we have to kind of justify them. And I was interested to see the thing you showed about the 2 guest books. We did this when we had a new Director General came to take over we were showing him around the archives, and we found a page in a book where he had written something about when the previous president, when one of the first president had left. So we opened the book at the page where he had written his comment, and that was kind of taking his past when he was lower down in the organization and saying, well, you're in the archive and you've been in there for a long time. And that was a nice thing to show. And I see some of the parallels about selling ourselves within the organization. Obviously, we're a public organization, so we have to go out into the public as well. And we have to be able to say that this is what we do. It's about, and I liked what you said also about not hiding your past. A lot, I'm in Germany, and a lot of companies have come to terms with that past and not tried to pretend that they weren't part of a situation. But they've said, we did what we had to do then, and we didn't like having to do it. We don't like that we did that in the past, but they haven't kept it in a bottom drawer for somebody to open at a later date and bring out. And I think that's a very important aspect, that you don't hide the past. You say, this was the situation. And we see today with the Black Lives Matter and people talking about slavery and situations, that all these things are coming out of the drawers now. And people are saying, "Oh, we didn't have anything to do with it," and they're being caught out. So I think a lot of what you said was very interesting, even for a public organisation. like our own. So I really enjoyed a lot of what you had to say. So thank you.
Thank you. No, and we don't do much work with public institutions or public companies, or public organizations, but we talk to each other a lot, and we find very similarities in how you have to sell yourself internally.
Yeah, yeah. It's a similar marketing process that we go through. So thanks.
And the joke, of course, is with companies or organizations that we work with a long time, work with us long enough, and you'll end up in the archive, just like your example. A question in the chat: has COVID-19 an impact on history marketing and the way to share archives and history value of companies? I don't know yet. I think it's a little bit too early to say. What we've seen anecdotally is that companies, I mean, every company has had to react somehow, and they've done major transitions or minor transitions. They've changed how they work and what they sell. So they are archiving that, although they don't call it archiving. They're just keeping the files. And we realized that there's a much more interesting documentation being created last year than in 2019, for instance. So we have to find it, and we're encouraging everybody to save whatever they've created. We can go out to them and say, save. It's more important than ever. That's more on how we have seen people create documents that will eventually become historically relevant, more than using their history. Question from Sue.
Hi, Anders. Susie Pak from New York.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
I wanted to say I really enjoyed your talk. I think that what you're saying is so true, particularly the one where you said that if you don't tell your history yourself, then someone else will tell it for you. So I started working on a project on the history of my university. And the reason why I got started on it is because I was appointed to a task force on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is kind of another thing that's ubiquitous in the United States now. The histories of slavery that you talked about, for example, which have been coming up in the US since 2001, it's kind of the predecessor to that, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And when I got appointed to this committee, it was as a faculty person, as a service appointment. But when I got onto the committee, I said, what exactly do we mean by diversity? Because like, what's our future goal? What does that look like when we say we want the institution to be more diverse or equitable? And they gave me the brand of the school. They said, it's Catholic, Vincentian, Global Metropolitan. And I said, I don't really know what that means. I don't know how those two words connect. And then I came back to them and I said, I figured out what's the problem. And they said, what? And I said, what's the story? I said, what's the history behind that word? Well, we say, we value diversity when, because when we were first founded, we were founded in 1870, there are no girls, no women were allowed, right? So when you say it's universal, what does that mean? And so I said, I'll look into it. And then it became a giant project. But one of the things that I'm finding is that it's actually, so I've been doing this project on DEI, and I've actually done some work with Winthrop Group, which is kind of what, they do very similar work to what you're doing and History Factory. And so I'm a senior consultant there. So I kind of, know the world that you're talking about, both the academic side and the uses of the past and the work that you're doing. Doing this project on DEI at the university has been like a case study on the difficulties of trying to convince people that history is important, and also that it's not scary, that it's okay to look at the past and confront the past. So one of the things that happened this year is that it just so happened I also got put on the 150th anniversary committee of the university, which is this year during the pandemic year, because I'm a historian. And because people know that I probably know more now about the university's history than most people alive. And I said, let's do a lecture series. So I've been doing this lecture series. I'd love to send it to you all so you can kind of see what's been done. The closer I get to the present, the more pushback I get. And so each lecture, I've been getting feedback from people, which is wonderful. And some of the feedback that I get is exactly what you would expect that you might get from a client. Like, for example, where are the positive stories, they'll say, because this is a story about DEI. So it talks about things like racism. It talks about things like, treatment of Jewish students or applicants or something like that. And so I was wondering how you handle that in a client setting, right? Where people say, well, we're not happy with the direction of the things that you're finding.
Yeah, because I've sold them on they should use their history, and here they're getting things that they don't think they can use. There's not a clear-cut answer. It all depends, as always, but we normally try to start it from reminding them that you have to tell the full story, otherwise people won't believe whatever you tell is good if you don't tell the bad. We remind them that at every step in an organization's existence, society has looked differently. So what was cutting edge then seems like run-of-the-mill today. But so you have to remind people, where were the boundaries? So girls were not allowed in public education. That was the boundary. So universal had a different meaning than riffing a bit on your example. So you have to remind people at every point, what was the context? And if you're talking to a young marketer at a fast-moving goods company, they don't necessarily care about what society looked like. They want to sell their brand, their product. So we just have to keep reminding them. So it's a constant education. It's the short answer. Not sure that helped, but then the other thing you said was also, I also mirror completely, which is that the closer you get to today, the more pushback you will get on examples, because people will be alive.
Yes.
People will be in the midst of things. We did work for a large Swedish bank, which turned 200. The savings bank's ID in Sweden turned 200 last year. They are the predecessor to this bank was the first savings bank, so they wanted to celebrate 200 years. Their past 3 years have been dominated by money laundering problems in the Baltics. And that's all that people think of when they think of that bank right now. So how do you deal with that? So we try to put that in perspective. We actually picked up a couple of other disasters they've had over the 200 years. So this would be 1 out of 3, showing that they've come back after every previous disaster. That was the way to get the marketing or the Marcom people at the company to say, okay, good. Then let's talk about the last 3 years too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other last questions? Otherwise, we've been talking for a long time.
I think there's a chat question, but okay, I find it's kind of very funny that you make the point that, okay, it was bad, but it was worse before that, so don't worry. But
sorry, I got to give one more example. So we have an insurance company in Sweden that was a global reinsurer early on in their career. So they had a tough year in 2010. And the idea was, the quote internally was, yes, it's bad now, but remember the San Francisco earthquake? That was bad, because they were reinsurers to a lot of American insurers, and they almost went bankrupt after the horrible earthquake in San Francisco in help me with my American history, 12.
Yeah. But I mean, it's quite I thought the most impressive thing for me was to think of, we should not have this expectation that the history always should necessarily be positive, or we could immediately use it for a brand, but we have to a little bit adjust to the way we look at it, or how we look at it in the scheme and the context of the history, and then it puts it, that really gives the value to it. I thought that's really for me very very helpful to see. There are 2 questions in the chat, Anders, if you would like to, if you still want to talk some more.
Absolutely. So the question from Adina, do we take care of archives for companies that no longer exist? We call this, what if Ericsson went bankrupt problem. because Ericsson has 10,000 shelf meters with us, what would we do? Of course, we'd keep it. We go against everything we believe in to throw it out or get rid of it. We'd keep it, and we'd try to find funding elsewhere. There is some public funding that can be put towards helping corporate archives. Not much, and we like to survive based on our own merits, but we do know where to look for that sort of public funding. So we'd never throw it out. I think that was the last question. The other ones were more cheerful.
No, I don't see anything. Somebody would like to have a last question, last comment. Now is the moment, I think. If not, well, thank you very much, Anders. That was amazing. I think it was very helpful to all our work. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time, taking your lunch time and spend it with us. So thank you very much, everybody, and see you soon.